But for them to lie in order to shut me down was something I had a very difficult time wrapping my head around. Like, we live in the United States of America. At this point, I feel like it was naive for me to believe that we would have an honest argument on the merits of the issue, and it would be easily realized that I was right. Now I know better. I know that the government will lie, they will cheat, they will steal, they will pull me out of a car at 3 in the morning in another state and put a gun to my head and steal almost 2,000 triggers from me and not bring me up on charges, not give me the due process that I'm constitutionally guaranteed in order to achieve their goal. So it has been a very, very eye-opening experience for me to see that the government will play dirty.
All right, welcome. Here with Lawrence Demonico from Rare Breed Triggers, and kind of excited to have you here again, and wanted you to talk about, really start out where you came from, like your story. What is Lawrence's story?
Wow, okay. All right, so I did, after high school, I joined the military. I did 10 years in the Navy, intelligence. When I left the Navy, I was serving at SEAL Team 6. I left the Navy and a week later was in Iraq as a private military contractor. I hopped around from company to company, agency to agency, and played that game for another 10 years. And then left Iraq for the last time, I want to say was probably 2012, and came back to the States and hung up my spurs. At that point,
or maybe more appropriately, your fins, or right?
Sure. So I decided to quit deploying. It was kind of a prereq for my wife. She said that, you know, and I totally get it, as many friends as I've lost throughout the GWAT that did not come home to their families. My wife had kind of laid down the law. We were not going to have kids until I was done, you know, with the war. So at that point, I came home and really focused on business. Based on my background, I kind of got into the firearms game. I started with a company called Rare Breed Firearms. For, you know, your audience that is unfamiliar, there are only a couple people on the planet that make ornamental, like 3-dimensional lower receivers.
Fun ones.
Very, very, very fun. Now,
like before I even knew your name, I haven't seen those. I've seen the paladin-looking Crusader,
right?
You know, lowers with they're fun.
They're a lot of fun. Now, I've taken a lot of heat based on my background because, you know, I come from a combat background. That why didn't I come out with a, you know, combat
high speed?
Exactly. You know, go to war AR. Well, if we're being honest, that market has been extremely saturated for many, many years. And
while that's what the world needs is another tactical AR manufacturer.
I mean, they're everywhere. You can't throw a stone without, you know, hitting an AR manufacturer. But the ARs that Rare Breed Firearms has designed over the years, now they're extremely functional, extremely high quality. Could you take it into combat? Sure. Would you? No, not really. It's a bit of I like to call them functional art. I mean, they're very, very cool. We've got a lower receiver that looks like a Spartan helmet. We've got one that looks like a Crusader helmet. And, you know, they've done, you know, really well over the years. But I didn't want to be just another guy. And I will tell you this, it is probably one of the most difficult things I've ever done in my life. Learning how to make a lower receiver in that 3-dimensional way with curves and arches was very, very complicated.
Like, so no, I don't own one. I'm hoping to rectify that.
We can work on that.
Okay. So, because the FFL that we use for our office that I own is Paladin Tactical. And
So
I love
Crusader
that.
would be perfect. for you.
Crusader would be perfect. And yeah, so maybe, if you later, maybe you can make a specialty one, and so specialty serial number.
We can work on that.
Okay, but the whole concept that is, do you cast it or do you mill it all?
No, they're all CNC'd. It would be, we probably could, cast them, but they're all, CNC'd from aluminum. Right. Now, once I, kind of had my arms wrapped around that, me being me, I'm always just kind of looking for, the next thing, the next opportunity. And
for those of you who don't know, Lawrence doesn't stand still very long.
that's a true story.
Okay.
True story.
Just cueing you people in.
Right. So the idea of a forced reset trigger happened across my desk. It was very intriguing. As the law is written, it was very, very clear to me that, hey, this should be a perfectly legal semi-automatic trigger as the law is written. Now, before I decided to move forward, I wanted to do my due diligence. I am not that guy that's, trying to get in trouble with the government. I'm not trying to, go to prison. I have a family that I love very, very much. So I definitely wanted to cross the T's and dot the I's. Now, the first question people ask me is, hey, well, did you take this idea and submit it to the ATF for approval? Well, no, absolutely not. Why would I do that? Like, I don't
They always say no.
Or they say yes and then change their mind.
Right.
And they have a very big history of just changing their mind.
Just because you submit something to the ATF does not mean that the answer you get will protect you.
No.
Ask almost anybody in the industry. Almost half of them have had an invention of theirs changed from legal to illegal, and then sometimes back.
Right. And I know numerous people that I think also have had perfectly legal ideas and submitted to the ATF, and they just say no. And when they say no, you don't really have any recourse.
Right.
So why ask them for permission when, who are they anyway? And when they give you their classification or determination, it's just their opinion. But then you've got to fight that fight. So, I don't feel as if I need to ask for permission to do something that is legal. So what did we do? Well, we took numerous steps to do the due diligence. First and foremost, the owner of Rare Breed Triggers, Kevin Maxwell, is an attorney, has done a lot of work with the ATF over the years. Well, just like myself, it's really easy to look at the statutory language, look at the trigger and say, all right, is it legal? Well, sure, it's legal. So his legal determination was that it was also a perfectly legal semi-automatic trigger. Well, we didn't stop there. We got another attorney to look at it. Now, this other attorney, I want to say, had done more than 20 years as a special agent with the ATF, now a practicing attorney, looked at it, came to the same conclusion. It is a perfectly legal semi-automatic trigger as the law is written. Well, we didn't stop there. We hired an expert who was also, I want to say, had been with the ATF for more than 20 years, looked at it and said, yep, this is a perfectly legal semi-automatic trigger. At that point, I feel like we had done our due diligence. So at this point, we had a prototype.
So what year are we talking when you were really pushing and learning and trying to come up with?
About 2020. So that year we were...
Nothing happened in 2020.
Nothing. It was it was a very, very busy year for us. We were putting together, prototyping, kind of ironing out the small issues, in addition to doing all the due diligence on making sure that it was good to go. Now, the two individuals, the attorney, which was a former ATF special agent, and the other special agent that had both reviewed the item, shot the item, and also gave us their determination, their expert opinion on the item stating that it was a perfectly legal semi-automatic trigger as the law is written. We took that, and then at that point we went into production. But before we released anything into the market, we wanted to double check, because when you go from a prototype to a production model, small things can change. So we had 2 more experts review the FRT 15. Both of them also former ATF special agents with, I believe both of them had more than 20 years experience with the ATF, both retired. Both of them also tested the FRT 15, shot it, and gave us their expert opinion. So I feel like, if we're being honest, the statutory definition of a machine gun is very simple.
But let's not go into that detail yet.
Well, what I'm going to say is I feel like anybody, myself, it doesn't take a rocket scientist or even an expert to look at it and say, yep, it meets the definition. But then we had 4 experts say it doesn't meet the definition of a machine gun, in addition to the attorney that also owns Rare Breed Triggers saying it's not a machine gun. So we go into production and go into market and launch it in December of 2020.
Okay, but what I'm trying to relate to others before we go into the details of a force reset trigger is that most people have a handgun in their house and a shotgun maybe, and maybe even a scary black gun, an AR, and they're quotes pro-gun.
Sure.
The Republicans, and Democrats bad, Republicans good, and but there are some people who are, let's just use the term, obsessive about firearms, right?
Okay.
Guilty. Pretty sure you're guilty.
Of course.
And I'm no engineer. I don't try things like that necessarily. I don't even have a manufacturer's license and never have. But I follow all of it, and I follow it throughout the industry, try to follow who's doing what and why, and advancements in technology. And, yes, John Moses Browning made some great things, but he was advanced technology dramatically. There are a lot of people doing that now, in every level of not just calibers, but the functions of firearms, and trying new things. And that's really what you did.
Sure,
You're trying
absolutely.
new things. You're like, okay, this is what the law says. Within the confines of that law, let's figure out how to make a trigger function this way.
Right, exactly. And the story that I typically share with people is, well, what was the goal? I want to achieve a high rate of fire and keep the trigger a semi-automatic trigger. Well, how do you do that? Well, other people have done it before. So you've got race triggers. You've got these, really crisp, short break race triggers. Well, that's awesome. All right.
Drop-in triggers that, you can build your rifle and have mil-spec triggers, and from, LPK, you order the parts kit, you drop them in, fine. That's what I do with helping people build AR-15s for their first ever, right?
Right.
Probably average one a week and have for 15 years. But then there's, okay, once you've done that, you want interesting firearms that are faster rate of fire or better triggers, either one or both.
Absolutely, or both.
Or both, and especially if you're trying to reach some precision. An AR-10, you're in a 6.5 Creedmoor and you want to hit at longer ranges, you probably want a better trigger than a standard mil-spec style trigger. And so you're going to the drop-ins.
Sure.
And whether it's 2-stage or it's just a really light single stage with an interesting reset, you can adjust them all. And and a lot of those they're still legal, but they are adjusting all the mechanics of that trigger. They're still a single function.
That's right. So then I think the next step in that evolution was a binary. And for your audience that doesn't understand what a binary is, it fires on the rearward movement pull action of the trigger, and it fires again when that trigger moves forward. So it's going to fire here and here. All right, great. That was kind of the next step. Personally, I'm not a big fan of binaries, but they've got their place. People love them, and they do very, very well. Well, how could we move forward in that next step of evolution? How can we achieve that high rate of fire and still stay legal? Well, how do we do that? Well, we did it with a forced reset. Now, I can explain that if you'd like exactly how that happens. Okay, so forced reset. You've got your finger on the trigger, all right? You're off safe, bolts home, round in the chamber, you're ready to fire. Now, when you function that trigger to the rear, you pull the trigger, the sear surface is going to release the hammer. Hammer is going to go forward. Hammer is going to hit the firing pin, fire the round. Round's going down range. It's going to... Gas is going to come back and it's going to push the carrier rearward. Now, when that carrier comes rearward, it's going to hit the hammer. Now, in a standard mil-spec trigger, when it hits the hammer is going to come down. It's going to get caught by a disconnector. It requires the shooter to ease up some pressure on that trigger so the disconnector releases the hammer, allowing the hammer to make contact with the sear surface on the trigger again. Then when the shooter pulls the trigger again, it will release the hammer again. Now, in an FRT, a forced reset trigger, when that carrier is coming rearward and hits the hammer is going to come down, it's going to make contact with the trigger, and it is going to force the shooter's finger forward. Now, the shooter's finger is still on the trigger. It is making contact with the trigger, but it is forcing the shooter's finger forward. Now, at this point, we have a device in the trigger called a locking bar. It is in the rear end of the trigger, and what's going to happen is it is going to pivot into place. Now, when it pivots into place, it is going to mechanically lock the trigger. At this time, no matter how hard the shooter pulls that trigger, whether it's a pound or 100 pounds of pressure, the shooter cannot function that trigger again. It cannot move. It is mechanically locked. Now, as the carrier comes forward and moves into battery, the carrier is going to hit that locking bar, unlock it, pivoting it away from contact with the rear end of that trigger, allowing the shooter to pull and function that trigger again. Now, it took me 15 seconds to explain it, but it happens in a fraction of a second, allowing the shooter to pull and function that trigger extremely fast, but that trigger moves and functions for every round that is fired. The trigger is reset and locked, mechanically locked, between every round that is fired. Therefore, in my opinion and numerous experts' opinion, it meets the legal definition of a semi-automatic trigger.
Right. Right. And in a full auto, a select fire weapon, it skips many of those steps, right?
Right. So the trigger functions one time for as many rounds as you'd like to fire as possible.
Until you let go.
That's right. So when the shooter pulls that trigger to the rear, he just holds it to the rear. It does not move. It is not forced into a reset. It just stays to the rear. And as the carrier comes forward and hits the auto sear, that just releases the hammer. The hammer just continues to be released by the auto sear, and the trigger does none of that work. Therefore, it can fire more than one round with a single function of the trigger.
That's right. Lawrence, now we know what the FRT is and the functions and how it compares to a standard semi-automatic and even to a full auto trigger mechanism. But now, so you developed this, and this is late 2020, and now you got to bring it to market. So you scaled up production?
That's right. So we scaled up production, released it. I want to say we released it in December of 2020, and they moved faster than we could have ever imagined. We could not make them fast enough. When I say we, I'm referring to Rare Breed Triggers as a company.
And how many, you started selling them like mad. I observed that.
Right.
Everybody was talking about it. And that's where I first noticed you guys, probably January of 21. And I went, wait, what is going on? And
well, very, very quickly, the internet was on fire, whether it was in, the Facebook groups or on YouTube. Everybody was loving them, but we couldn't manufacture them fast enough. They were just selling. So
you were selling them directly to consumers
that is
and
correct.
Then to distributors and wholesalers.
We did not offer it through like a distributor for quite some time. Why?
Why?
We couldn't manufacture them enough to just sell them, ourselves. So
And they're not a firearm, so you can ship it directly to people.
that's right. And you don't need an FFL, to manufacture it or sell it or ship it. So it was very easy for us to do.
Okay. How many employees did you guys have at one point as you were growing?
Well, that was really kind of the biggest issue. I knew the world would love them, once they got to know them, and I knew we'd do well, but we really weren't prepared for the world to love them so much. So I want to say within a couple of weeks, we were receiving 500-ish customer service emails a day. And at that point, it was like, holy guacamole, how am I going to wrap my arms around this? Because we didn't really have the infrastructure for this.
Right.
We're manufacturing and we're shipping, but we don't have the customer support, network for this. So I tried to kind of handle a lot of that myself, and I was failing miserably. And then at that point, we brought on customer service help, but we kind of had to educate them and bring them up to speed in order to kind of help people as well.
Sure. And the early triggers, you had to really kind of know what you were doing to make it work.
Absolutely. So the trigger really, it worked the way it was supposed to work, but there's a huge but.
The right buffer.
Well, one thing that we really didn't take into account and made a huge difference is there is a huge variance from AR to AR. Now, you've got a variance in uppers, in lowers, your takedown pins, whether they're, a couple thou high in a lower, couple thou low in a lower, like all of these variances added up. So it really made a difference if you were going to put it in, a really, really cheap AR that had the tolerances of a barn door, or you put it in, a really, really high-end AR with extremely tight tolerances. It made a difference. Now, beyond that, well, inherent in this design, and a lot of people thought it was a design flaw, and it's not a design flaw. It's just the way, in order to get the FRT to even operate, as I explained, the carrier comes back and hits the hammer. The hammer forces a reset on the trigger. So you're always going to have pressure there. You're always going to have friction there. Now, well, what kind of buffer and buffer spring are you running? Are you running really weak ammo or really hot ammo? How big is your gas port? Like all of these things.
Run a fatty gas tube, or are you running?
Bingo. So there were a lot of things to take into account here. So what would run in, a gun with tight tolerances, and they're running hot ammo and they've got a heavy buffer and a good buffer spring, great. But then somebody puts in, really, really weak ammo and they've got a really, really weak or light buffer. Well, it didn't want to run. So of course we're getting bombarded with customer service issues, and we've got to help people tune their gun.
Right. And for those who, track this, having an AR-15 that you fire very slowly, semi-automatic, most of the time, you're going to have problems with different ammo, different gas tubes, different buffers, but most of them modern ones will function fine. The faster you fire, the more difficulties you have. My very first transferable machine gun was an XM177, and I tried to put a 10.3 inch barrel on it, and that has a lot of problems. And
I can see that. And for the common Joe that, he knows how to shoot, he's but not really intimately familiar with how an AR operates, well, it can be overwhelming. It can be very confusing. Like, what do I do? Like, they don't even understand that, the difference between, weak and hot ammo. They don't understand that gas ports can be of a different size. They don't understand that gas tubes, the length matters. Like, all of these things that come into play, and there's multiple variables. And then you throw in this other variable of this trigger. And they had some people really, really got it. Now, luckily for us, groups popped up on, Facebook and other social media platforms very, very quickly. People are putting out, videos on YouTube trying to help everyone in the community understand. But then, of course, there's a lot of people that don't use social media and that they're having the problem on their own and trying to figure it out. And then, of course, we've got to field those customer service issues. And it was definitely a bear. After a few months, we were able to kind of get our arms wrapped around it and, handle it in a much better way.
Now, at what point is the ATF stepping in?
Well, that's a good question. So I don't remember the specific period, but the ATF sent us a cease and desist letter. And in this letter, they make claims that are inaccurate and mechanically impossible. So we ask them for a copy of their report, a copy of their,
what kind of findings they did when they
exactly,
tested
what
it?
kind of tests did you do? Well, they wouldn't give that to us. They said no. So we asked multiple times and they continued to say no. Well, at that point, we were like, we knew we needed to do something. So what were we going to do? Well, we filed suit. We filed a lawsuit in the Middle District of Florida in order to get a declaratory judgment that the FRT 15 was not a machine gun. And it wasn't until a good way into that litigation that we were even able to get a copy of the test and report that they had put together. But we had to get it basically in discovery because they were unwilling to turn it over to us.
The ATF not being helpful.
To say the least.
You mentioned earlier when you started, you didn't want to submit to the ATF to ask them permission. And part of the reason is because manufacturers know that the ATF is essentially like a scolding leftist teacher who's just going to tell you no. And
I think that's a very accurate way to put it.
They're very aggressive about it. They make no qualms about it, and they act like they don't need to be questioned.
Bingo. I don't want to put my future in their hands. They're not going to be honest. That's one thing that I have learned. They're not going to be honest. They're going to do whatever they want to do, and then you're the bad guy for calling them on it.
Right. See, so you filed, and
that's right.
In that particular case, what happened with that?
It flew like a lead balloon. We were able to get into court for a preliminary injunction hearing. We were attempting to get an injunction against the government as we moved toward a declaratory judgment. What ended up happening, and I felt like nobody really knows how this played out, but we had proven in the hearing that, our due process was violated, that the government didn't do what they should have done, and so on and so forth. And at one point, the judge asked us if we would be willing to accept a remand, give the ATF the opportunity to do it again. We said that we weren't opposed to that. We'd be willing to let them have another shot. Now, the attorney that was representing the government was unable to make that decision for the government. So we took a short recess. He made some phone calls. We came back into the court and he said, no, we're not going to take it back. Now, at this point, I think it was very, very clear to the judge, the government had stacked the administrative record. They would not include any of our evidence. They did not want our expert reports to be included. Like, we had proven very, very clearly that we were kind of railroaded. And I truly feel in my heart of hearts that the judge was going to remand it back to the government. So he told us, file a motion for remand and I'll look at it. Like, this was the judge's idea. He literally told us, file a motion for remand. So of course, we leave the court and that's what we start working on. And a very, very short period later, the case was just dismissed. There was a joint filing date for a report. It was an administrative issue. It was not a big deal. But I think the judge knew that he was going to have to side with us, but did not want to side with us. So he looked for a reason to punt the ball. So this joint filing report had been missed, and he just dismissed the case without prejudice. So now,
which made him legal.
Well, I don't know if it made him, like, a decision really was never made, so we never had a legal determination. Now, at that point, we're not going to change what we're doing.
Then all you got is a cease and desist order.
Right, that is still based on physical impossibilities, and they would not back up. Like, we asked numerous times for them to sit down with us, explain to us how you've come to these conclusions that are impossible, but of course they were unwilling to do it. Now, based on what the court had to say in Florida and us asking for or the court asking us if we'd be interested in a remand, after the case was dismissed, we sent all of our evidence, our expert reports, everything we had to the ATF and said, hey, well, here it is. Now, of course, did they consider it? No, they just ignored it. So at that point, we were already in the process of moving from Florida to North Dakota. So at this point, we get moved to North Dakota, we get offices in North Dakota, and we start operating out of North Dakota. And at that point, we end up, refiling in North Dakota in order to get that, declaratory judgment that we so badly needed. We weren't any more successful in North Dakota than we were in Florida. And it's very interesting, the game the government played. They argued improper venue, and they ended up winning. And it's very interesting how they were able to do it. Had Rare Breed Triggers been a C Corp, North Dakota would have been a proper venue. But because Rare Breed Triggers was an LLC, precedent said that North Dakota was not the correct venue, and they were able to get it dismissed again based on improper venue.
Well, I'd heard a lot of people saying we got to do everything in North Dakota, and I don't buy that.
In hindsight, I'm not quite convinced. In very recent history, things have not been going the way of the Second Amendment in North Dakota.
Right. Well, and that's a long discussion about the Second Amendment itself, and really until Bruin, well, we've had our butts handed to us in almost every manner.
I think Bruin is going to be an absolute game changer, but I think it's going to take a while for it to work because there are so many judges that are just ignoring the
They're
ruling.
going to ignore it.
And they're going to ignore it as long as they can, and until such time that they're told they can't. And I don't know how long that'll take.
So you served in the Navy for protecting your country, and then now you're dealing with your own country, treating you like a criminal.
True. Now, I'm no stranger to a fight. I'll never back down from a fight. That's just who I am. That's who I've been my entire life. And the majority of my adult life, I have been sent to some of the worst places on this planet to fight on behalf of our government and on behalf of the citizens of the United States of America. So I will tell you this. When we got the cease and desist letter from the ATF, I was amazed with the inaccuracies, the falsehoods, the physical impossibilities laid out in this cease and desist.
The outright lies.
I mean, we can definitely say that. And here's the problem that I have is, so the tests were conducted and report generated by people the ATF considers to be subject matter experts. So I'm looking at this and going, all right, the person that conducted these tests and wrote this report, one, either they're an idiot and they really don't understand what's happening here and they don't understand the words that they've written, or two, they're being intellectually dishonest or just outright lying in order to achieve the goal of shutting us down. And I have a very difficult time with the first possibility of them just not knowing what they're doing. So I'm more apt to believe that they will say whatever they want, however they want, in order to achieve the goal of shutting us down. And at that moment, I was angry. I couldn't have been any more angry. I've gone all over the world, fought in Afghanistan, fought in Iraq. I mean, I have been through the ringer for this country. And I knew the government wouldn't like what I've done, but I knew what I had done was legal. I knew what I had done was okay. But for them to lie in order to shut me down was something I had a very difficult time wrapping my head around. Like, we live in the United States of America. At this point, I feel like it was naive for me to believe that we would have an honest argument on the merits of the issue, and it would be easily realized that I was right. Now I know better. I know that the government will lie, they will cheat, they will steal, they will pull me out of a car at 3 a.m. in another state and put a gun to my head and steal almost 2,000 triggers from me and not bring me up on charges, not give me the due process that I'm constitutionally guaranteed in order to achieve their goal. So it has been a very, very eye-opening experience for me to see that the government will play dirty.
And why do you believe they didn't want to charge you?
I don't think they could win. Like, even I have been put on the stand under oath, being questioned throughout this process, and I've said on more than one occasion, charge me. Like, let's do the dance. You're accusing me of manufacturing and transferring 100,000 illegal machine guns, but you won't charge me and attempt to prosecute me criminally? Like, does that make any sense? Imagine, for instance, that you pull over a U-Haul with 2,000 fully automatic M16s or 2,000, or 2,000 fully automatic Uzis. In what world is that guy not going to jail right then and there? In what world are they not prosecuting that guy?
Because they don't want the case.
Right.
They don't want to have to go to court and go to a judge and say, this is why.
And they would never succeed in that goal. So what did they do? They found a way to pull me into court into New York. And they did not come after me with criminal charges for manufacturing and transferring illegal machine guns, which is a criminal charge. They came after me for fraud. But guess what? Fraud is also a criminal charge. But they didn't come after me criminally. They actually sued me civilly for fraud. Why? Because the burden of proof comes from here, way down here. And why? Because they cannot win if they were to try to prosecute me criminally. Why? Because I'm right. We haven't done anything wrong. By the statutory language, the FRT 15 only fires one round with every single rearward function of the trigger.
And you contacted us
That's right.
and came to NAGR. I even forget exactly how that happened. It was you just reach out to our offices.
So when the heat got turned up, I knew that we needed help. And I'm shaking the trees. I'm looking for people that have the network, have resources, just have the ability to help me. And I don't want to throw anyone under the bus, but let me tell you what, I called all the organizations. And not only were you guys the only one to take my call, you were the only organization that offered to help.
Well, and we looked at it and said, okay, there's a business guy, and looks like he's been wronged, even at first blush, but we're also trying to determine if we help, is this setting a precedent? Because I looked at the whole bump stock issue and said, I don't like bump stocks. I never owned one. Think they're kind of gay. But I don't want to make them illegal. And I watched as they were being made illegal, not by law, not by Congress, by
Executive fiat.
by a president of the United States, a Republican president of the United States, telling the ATF, make those illegal.
Right.
And they did.
So I also am not the biggest fan of bump stocks. It's just not my flavor. But should they be legal all day, every day, and twice on Tuesday? There is absolutely nothing that is illegal about a bump stock. So while I'm not a fan, I absolutely support their fight.
There are lots of things I'm not a fan of in the firearms world. You know, the lasers on pistols, and it's just not my thing. But should we make them illegal? No,
I have to support them in their fight.
Right.
That is honestly one of my biggest pet peeves with the firearms industry. I feel like, and I don't know what it is, whether it's the cool guy mentality, but we eat our own. Rather than standing together, we tear each other apart.
Yeah.
And I really wish it weren't that way.
Yeah. Well, so we looked at the bump stock issue and said, yeah, there are already some cases going, we'll support those. And then we looked at yours and he said, this is similar. This is the ATF by just their so-called experts supposedly making a determination, but not really explaining themselves and making a product illegal. And that if we just let this kind of stuff happen, they're going to make everything illegal.
And what's even worse about that is anything that is voluntarily submitted to the ATF for classification. Well, number one, that classification is not a legal determination. It is the ATF's opinion on the item.
Right.
So bump stocks have been submitted numerous times, and the ATF said, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay. Then, of course, the Vegas, tragedy occurred, and the president comes down and says, do what it takes. So what did the ATF do? Oh, you know what? I think we were wrong. You know what? The bump stocks are machine guns. So that in itself, I have a very, very, very big problem with. So your experts had an opinion.
And you discarded it.
And they said it's legal. So were they an expert when they said it was legal? Or were they an expert when they said it was illegal? Because nothing changed with the product between those two decisions. The only thing that happened is there was pressure from the executive branch that said, figure it out, make it illegal. And to me, that I have a very difficult time having any faith in an executive agency that they're not honest. They're going to do what they're told. And when that expert says it's legal, it's because he was told it's okay to say it's legal. And he's going to say it's illegal because he's told to say, hey, it's illegal now.
You misspoke. Something had changed between the ATF's decision to call it a bump stock legal and then later to call it illegal. That was the presidency.
Right.
We went from Barack Obama and the ATF said it's legal to Donald Trump. And the ATF said it's illegal.
Right. Well, what I meant is nothing changed with the physical product, but absolutely, I 100% agree.
And unfortunately, as the saying goes, it took Nixon to go to China. But we'll leave that there. So we looked at it and said, yeah, that doesn't make any sense, and how can we help? And that's where the connection came. And at that point, frankly, it was, okay, where can we file? So we looked at the number of areas and said, okay, Northern District of Texas.
That's right.
Looks pretty good.
And that case has been going extremely well. Judge Reed O'Connor in the Northern District of Texas has right now, he initially issued a temporary restraining order against the government, but that restraining order only protected the named plaintiffs in the case. And there were 3 individual named plaintiffs in the case. We were able to expand that TRO into a preliminary injunction, and that preliminary injunction protects the plaintiffs, the organizations, NAGR and TGR, in addition to all of their thousands and thousands and thousands of members. I am highly confident that it will go in favor of NAGR, TGR, and the FRT 15 or other force reset, similar force reset triggers. And when Judge O'Connor issued his preliminary injunction, the government filed an emergency appeal to the Fifth Circuit to stay that decision. And when the Fifth Circuit responded, they signaled, in my opinion, it was a very clear signal. They actually stated they don't believe that the FRT 15 is illegal in the first place. So I feel that, while Judge O'Connor is going to rule in our favor, well, the Fifth Circuit is highly likely to rule in our favor as well. Now, that brings us to the Supreme Court, because right now, the Cargill case is currently sitting in front of the Supreme Court. On bump stocks. And interestingly enough, the government, in their opening brief to the Supreme Court, has pulled forced reset triggers into their filing. And they've done it a couple of times, and I'm fairly upset by it because they are stating facts that are untrue about forced reset triggers. And as I or anyone having to do with forced reset triggers are not a party to that action, don't give the opportunity to respond to those ridiculous allegations. Right. But that case could be the be-all, end-all, depending on what specific questions the Supreme Court answers when they decide to answer those questions.
So, Lawrence, when the ATF sent you the cease and desist letter, you're a smart guy, you're a good businessman. Why not just okay, adios, I'll go design something else?
I'd like to say it was a tough decision. And this is kind of weird to say, and actually hear myself say, it was one of the toughest, easiest decisions I've ever had to make, because I knew it was going to be tough. I knew it was going to be stressful. I knew it would weigh on me. I knew it would weigh on my family. It would impact my life for years to come. But it's not always easy to do the right thing. But who I am, I don't think, of course I could live with myself not doing the right thing, but I could not live with myself and not do the right thing. And then how do I square raising my 2 young boys to stand up for what they believe in and do the right thing when it counts if I wasn't willing to do the same? And I get emotional right now because this is probably it's really, really tough. But one thing I tell my boys all the time, I say integrity. You only get to lose it once. So
then it's really tough to regain.
Right. So I made a decision. We're going to do this. We're going to go to market with this. Why? Because we're right. Then I feel like the moment I made that decision, I was committed to seeing it through. Now, the government gave me an opportunity to walk away. Like, had I just said, okay, when they sent that cease and desist letter, I probably would have been all right. It probably would have stopped right there. But you know what wouldn't have stopped? Their tyranny. They would have gone door to door. They probably, not only harassing customers, but probably charging customers. And I'm not okay with that.
Right.
So I gave my word to everyone publicly that no matter the consequences, I would see this thing through to the end. And I still stand by that, no matter the consequences. Should I end up in prison? Don't get me wrong, I don't want to go to prison. But
I'm sure your wife doesn't.
Absolutely, neither do my two boys. I don't want to go to prison for them. But at some point, I feel like I had to draw a line in the sand and said, what you're doing isn't okay. And you're going to continue doing it until someone says no more and takes a stand. So here I am, and I'm taking the stand. And it has not been easy. It has been very challenging. They have made me look like a terrorist in court. And that's not me. I am a good person. I have, values and morals. I'm very ethical. I am a good dad, a good husband. I am a good person. And I'm just choosing to stand by my word and see this thing through to the end. Now, I've got to say this is the right time. I don't know, I would have given it my best, but I don't know that I'd still be standing if not for you at NAGR. You guys have made this fight more manageable. You've definitely having you guys in the trenches beside me. I can't even begin to tell everyone how helpful it has been. It has definitely helped with just all of the things. Your network, your support, just all of the things has made this, more manageable. Not just for me, but for my family, all of our customers. And I truly feel like we're going to win. Is it going to be tomorrow? No. But sometime in the near future, we're going to win this thing, but it wouldn't have been possible without NAGR.
Well, and really, our members, they're the ones that make
Absolutely.
it all possible, that, give us the resources to actually choose to pick the fight and to be a part of it. You picked the fight, and to a large degree, because you were an inventor and wouldn't let go of the bone. And we said, yeah, we want to help with that kind of fight. And even after Judge Connor had issued the injunction, the nationwide injunction against the ATF from harassing our members, explicitly saying you cannot harass them. The ATF started harassing one of our members in West Virginia.
Right, and he's not the only one. And then they want to play the game. Well, we don't know who your members are. Unless you want to give us your entire membership list, we're not going to know. Are you kidding me?
Come on.
Right. Ridiculous.
We were born during the day.
It wasn't yesterday.
It wasn't yesterday. and we told them, of course, to pound sand. But that was telling that, and they were pretty obstinate in that. We're going to link to that video at the end of this one so people can hear that call and from the ATF and from between our member. But we're not done. Now, to this day, Rare Breed cannot sell triggers. Even though there's an injunction, it applies to everybody except Rare Breed because of the New York case.
All right, so this has been one of the most challenging issues personally for me. The judge in New York has issued a preliminary injunction against, Rare Breed Triggers and myself from manufacturing and selling force reset triggers. But it only applies to us. Now, Judge Reed O'Connor out of the Northern District of Texas has an injunction against the government from going after anyone else for manufacturing and selling force reset triggers. So now we have, countless, more than a dozen, maybe 18 to 24 patent infringers selling our product.
Because you can't.
Because I can't. And it is, it's outrageous. So literally there's only, Rare Breed Triggers, myself, the owner of Rare Breed Triggers, Kevin Maxwell, cannot manufacture and sell force reset triggers, but everybody else. It's very interesting. I was in a deposition I believe we were in Virginia. The government was deposing me and they asked if we had inventory. And I told them that we did. And they asked if I would tell them where it was located. And I did not want to tell them where the inventory was located because naturally they're going to go seize it. So I had the address of one of the locations because it was just our office. So I had to tell them, yeah, I've got inventory in my office in North Dakota. Well, where is your other inventory? I was like, I don't know the actual address because I don't. It's not an address that I've memorized and have no reason to memorize. And then they asked, well, would I get the address and give it to them? I was like, absolutely not. Like, I'm not going to do that for you because you're just going to go seize it. And they were like, well, why won't you give it to us? Because I have every intention of winning this fight and going back into business. Now, they did. They ended up getting a warrant and raiding our office in North Dakota and seizing, I don't know, $250,000 in triggers that just happened to be boxed up sitting in our office. And then thankfully, I didn't happen to know the address of where everything else was, or they would have gotten warrants and tried to, attempted to seize that stuff too. But we have every intention of going back into business. I will tell you this. We have the FRT 15 3 position, which is amazing. We have worked out every issue. It is insane. And I can't wait to bring that to market. We also have models for the MP5. We've got multiple models. Like, we haven't slowed down. Like, I have not slowed down at all. Like, we plan to win. And when we win, we will come back with a bang. For sure.
I like that one. We'll come back with a bang. Or a couple of bangs.
Absolutely.
Well, I look forward to that because I want to play a role in that and tooting the horn. It makes the guns fun.
It does.
And frankly, it's a great product and it moves the firearms industry forward. I mean, we're going to have advancements and hopefully we can stop the ATF from quashing them right away.
I think we're well on our way, especially we should know something very significant in the next couple of weeks when Judge Reed O'Connor has the opportunity to issue a final ruling in that case. Now, it is not going to help me in New York. I still will be out of business, but it's a huge first step, and I feel very, very confident that the government will appeal that to the Fifth Circuit, and we may or may end up in the Supreme Court. I think it depends on how the Supreme Court answers the questions posed in the Cargill bump stock case, but they will be answering that in the spring. So 2024 is going to be a huge year for force reset triggers.
Plus, I think we're going to have some directive from the U.S. Supreme Court on Rahimi, and it's going to establish some issues that might have some effect. It certainly is going to have an effect on making courts behave.
I hope so.
Behave.
I hope so.
And actually read the Second Amendment and say, yeah, no, they can't do that. And that's really our goal. Our goal as an organization is that the ATF has some handcuffs. They're only authorized to do what Congress writes the laws to tell them to do. And they can't exceed that authority. So we're working on that.
It's a lofty goal.
Yeah, it's a lofty goal. Lawrence, thank you for coming out here and into Colorado and our studio and playing with us and talking with us. I hope that our next discussion is a victory lap. That's what I'm looking for.
That would be a good day. So that'll be a good day.
Yeah.
And thank you for having me. It's always good to see you.
You bet.